Hello friends, for today's video I wanted to have a little bit of a discussion where we talk about remakes. Do we like them? Do we dislike them? What are the pros and cons of remakes? And I didn't want to just give my perspective, I wanted to also include yours. So I had asked over on my main channel's community tab, what are your thoughts on remakes? And I really enjoyed seeing your responses, so I wanted to read through some of those. I'm going to start with just giving my general thoughts on this topic. This is one where I don't feel really strongly in any specific direction. I go back and forth. So when I'm saying remakes, what I'm referring to is you'll have a work of fiction. Usually it starts as a book, and then that will get an adaptation, and then that will then be remade. That adaptation will be remade. Or you have a show that people love and adore, and maybe it's animated, and then they remake it as live action. And we've seen a lot of these recently for works that have been adapted, sometimes at this point multiple times. So for example, Avatar. It has an animated show a lot of people absolutely adore and love, and they still go back to, they're still really nostalgic for it, and it holds up for a lot of people. And then there was, I've never seen it, but apparently there was an atrocious live action movie. I've not seen the movie itself. I've seen clips of it though. It did not look good. And people were thinking, this is terrible. I wish you had just left it alone. You would have just left it alone. And then Netflix now is like, let's try. And then they have taken a chance and they've decided they're going to adapt it. And that's kind of what really sparked this for me. There are others, of course. One Piece, for example, is a manga that has a very successful anime, and then they got a live action, and a lot of people loved the live action, and now they're getting another animated show. It's just with a different group of people, and it's going to be a different animation style while the current anime is still ongoing. And that one for me, I'm just like, oh, I don't want to ruin anybody's fun. And that's where I come back to, like, even though that in theory, I'm like, that annoys me because there's so many things that I would love to see adapted or even remade, things that are really old. And I think these new developments with animation style could do justice to something that is a lot older and just was made at a time when the technology wasn't there. I think there's so many things that deserve that treatment, and it feels like sometimes we're just going for the things that are already popular and already have an enormous fan base because it'll make us money. That's what it feels like when it's coming from all these streaming services and whatnot. So I have that thought, but at the same time, I'm like, I see how enthusiastic the fans are of these different stories and how excited they are. And I'm like, man, I don't want to ruin anybody's fun. Life is tough. And that's why I say I go back and forth. This ultimately, at the end of the day, is not a super important topic, but because it's something I discuss here on my channel, adaptations and stories in all their different forms, I thought it would be an interesting conversation to have. The one area where I will always think that remakes make sense are when, I was kind of touching on this before, when the technology really wasn't there at the time that something was made. And you could even go as far as to say the technology now makes it so that you almost can't go back and experience that story, and I'll elaborate in a second with a specific example. In that instance, the remake makes so much sense because it's not just that there's a new group of people that might have a chance to fall in love with it if only there was something more modern, but also the people that loved it when it first came out, it's now not as accessible and it's really hard to go back and experience it again. And I think a perfect example, and interestingly enough, it's tied to something coming out very soon, similar to Avatar, but the Final Fantasy VII remake. So we've had Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. That's the one that's about to come out. We have just Remake, which came out a little while before. And I'm going to put up on the screen some side-by-sides of the original and the remake. And first off, you didn't have voice acting in Final Fantasy VII. You had to read through everything. Also, there were these beautiful landscape shots that almost look like paintings, and then these atrocious looking sort of kind of three-dimensional characters that would traverse, and you're like, oh, this is clashing so bad. But they were doing the best they could with the technology they had at the time. And for so long, so many people, when they, years ago, dropped a kind of just teaser of if they were to remake it, they did the opening of, I think it was at E3. They did the opening of the game, but with modern technology, and people lost their minds, me included. I was like, oh my gosh, are we getting a remake? Are we getting a remake? Are we getting a remake? And I was so excited, and they were like, no, that was just for fun. And we were devastated. And then when they announced like, no, yeah, we actually are going to make a remake, then we got to be excited all over again. And in that instance, that is an example of a time where the technology, it's hard to go back and replay that game. And the idea of sometimes literally accessibility, that was on the PlayStation 1, I think, right? Yeah, PlayStation 1. And most people now they don't have the console. If they want to find it, maybe it's going to cost them a lot, or they got to look at some kind of used store and they don't even know if the console is going to work. And then they got to find the game itself. And a lot of people, that's just not going to happen. You can't play it because certain games, they've remastered them or they've made it so that you can go back a certain amount. For example, Final Fantasy X came out on PlayStation 2, but you can play it on PlayStation 5. So there are some that works for. Final Fantasy VII, the original, is not one of them. Remakes, in that scenario, make sense. And I think that is the area where I will always be in support of it. But some of the other areas, I'm a little up in the air. And I wanted to go through some of your thoughts because some of them echo some of my feelings. But also some of them don't, and they're very different. And so I wanted to read just so we have a variety of takes on this topic. So first off, yes, I'm tired of remakes. I have to admit, whenever I hear another remake being announced, I roll my eyes. I'm afraid I've become a curmudgeon. I'd honestly prefer adaptations of material that haven't been adapted before. But even then, I don't have faith these days. I'd really hate to see a story I love get butchered by studios. I think it's best they just focus on making brand new stories. Who knows? Maybe they'll catch lightning in a bottle that way instead of the umpteenth remake they have up their sleeve. I wanted to specifically highlight the part where you're saying, even though you want them to focus on stories that haven't been adapted before, you also don't want them to ruin that said story. And that's how I kind of now am starting to feel about the Cosmere, because so many of us for so long have wanted the Cosmere adapted, but there have been so many bad fantasy adaptations over the last few years that I have just kind of lost hope. And I'm like, I just don't want that bad taste in my mouth. You know, I don't want something bad associated with something I love if it means that it would just, I'm in agreement. I'll just leave it at that. Next, I think if there's a new perspective or story to be explored in a remake, I'm fine with it. But there are so many excellent books out there to be adapted, so similar line of thinking. I would desperately love to see Sabriel adaptation, for instance, or something by Tamora Pierce. Someone said, are you my bookish soulmate? Because that is exactly the two things I would adapt. I would love something by Tamora Pierce to be adapted. Sabriel would be so cool adapted. And I think it's not, both of those are not necessarily fitting into specific trends that we're seeing a little too often in fantasy adaptations these days. They would be doing something different, and I think a lot of people like it. And Sabriel specifically, I think, would catch a lot of people's eye because there's almost horror leanings to that one, or you could anyway up the effects to sort of look drearier, colder, darker, scarier. And I think a lot of people would really dig that. So I agree. I think those would be, I know that's not necessarily specific to remakes, but if we were to take something that hasn't been made into an adaptation before instead of remaking it, I think both of those would be great. I also think Sabriel could have a really fantastic animation style if they went the animation route, where I'm almost thinking, not literally Tim Burton style, I wouldn't want it to be like that, but there could be things that really bring out the darker side of it through the animation. I think that would be great. There's so many books that I wish would get adapted so I could visually see them. This is also a risky wish because so many adaptations suck. Yes, agreed. I'm not tired of remakes. I'm tired of remakes that go fully against the spirit of the original. Book source materials are tricky because you could say that a new film or TV version of something that already had one or more adaptation is a re-adaptation. This is a different thing altogether dependent on how faithful or not the first adaptation was. I'm actually curious about the announced anime remake of One Piece, from which studio, as updated animation techniques and story pacing, could make it feel quite different than the original show. So there's just some things in there that I thought were interesting, and I wanted to make sure I read that one. only makes sense when the first one was butchered. If not, it's just another cash grab, it's just another grab for something familiar that will be easy cash. There's so many interesting stories already there for the taking. They just don't want to bother with an original script. This is something that I didn't touch on at the beginning, but that I completely agree with. That I've said before, I'm very picky when you're adapting something that already exists, because if you're going from something that was written before, or the story's already there, the characters are already there, the world's already there, all you need to do is adapt that and then bring the visuals and bring the acting and the direction. Those are, of course, I'm not just saying like, oh, it's so easy, but I'm just saying you don't have to worry about the writing. You don't have to worry about creating this world. You have so much of it already done for you. So really focus on what makes this medium the new place that this story should be told within. If that is what you truly think, like, I need to see this story brought to life as a show. I need to see this brought to life as an animated film. Whatever the case may be, when you already have so much of it developed for you and then you bring it to this other medium, it should be good. If you're going to spend millions of dollars, it should be good. That's why I'm very picky about not just adaptations, but anything that has its source materials. There's already something there. So I guess literally adaptations, I kind of say, but remakes too. It's like, okay, you just need to get this. That's it. That's all you've got to do. So you don't have to worry about the creativity as much. As far as with them being butchered, I'm thinking a lot of fantasy fans likely remember that there was an Aragon movie, and a lot of people didn't really like that movie, and now I think that Aragon might get another shot at getting adapted. I go back and forth on this because there is a part of me that's like, well, it would be cool for a lot of people to see a good adaptation of that story, especially because so many people loved it growing up. At the same time, there's a part of me that's like, you kind of got your chance. Can we focus on somebody else? But that's not fair, because that's not really you got your chance, because it's not like the author had control over that situation. It's that somebody did a bad job, and I'm sure the author would love if there was a good adaptation of their work. So I don't like that initial instinct of mine of, well, give something else a shot then. And also there's plenty of studios that you can have both. You can have the things that have been made in the past remade, and then you can have the things that haven't been made yet made. Or you can just have brand new original things, like someone else said. I'm not really tired of remakes, but I do feel that these big studios are just being lazy. They have the plots pretty much verbatim what I was saying. They have the plots ready, the characters, settings, etc. They pretty much have the script and the storyboard on hand. They're banking on remakes because they know that these animations/shows already have existing fan bases, which cut their marketing costs for new movie promotions. They make money with their eyes closed with these remakes. Would love to see something original soon. It's been a long time since we've had something so massively global as Lord of the Rings, Game of Thrones, Harry Potter, Hunger Games, and many more. And what's interesting is those ones that you mentioned, there have now been new things associated with all of those. You have the Amazon show for Lord of the Rings. You have whatever for Harry Potter. You have the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes for Hunger Games. You have House of the Dragon for Game of Thrones. So even those that have had tons of success, it's like, how can we suck even more money out of these IPs? I really wish that lesser known companies would, I really love this comment. I just want to say, I remember this one and I really love it. I really wish that lesser known companies would look at adapting books more seriously. Lately, all the adaptations of books and games have been done by big names like Netflix or Amazon. The problem is they are such big companies, they have nothing to lose from a bad show, so the adaptations end up awful. They become soulless, unfaithful, and they only just, help these big corporations. The Witcher, Rings of Power, Halo, Wheel of Time are all examples of this. However, if a smaller company with the right funds was willing to take the risk of adapting, they would have far more incentive to do it well because they would have something to lose. I think that I know that you probably weren't being literal, but I just want to say I don't think that these big companies have nothing to lose, but I do think that there isn't nearly the same risk as smaller companies. If a smaller company is like, we have got to get this right, then because if they don't, then they might just go under. I mean, Square Soft, right? Not Square Enix, but Square Soft, I'm pretty sure. When they made the Final Fantasy Spirits Within, which was actually better, I feel like, than people give it credit for. And also, it was utilizing technology at that time that pretty much nobody had done before. So they really took a chance. And then that basically bankrupted them, I'm fairly certain. And that is so disheartening because they were actually trying. That's an example of somebody that tried, but it feels like wrong time. It was, instead of right place at the right time, it was just wrong time, wrong everything, which is so unfortunate because I feel like they actually went for it. But the point is that you can see that it can really harm a company if they don't do a good job. I think the opposite end, while this company isn't small, they're not Amazon, but and it ended up being on Netflix, but the people behind it were not Netflix, and that would be for Arcane. Those individuals really, there was no reason that show needed to be good as it was. They didn't even have to make a show. They already have a very successful game, and I'm not literally saying they're a smaller company. I'm just saying that they were like, you know what? Riot, I believe is the company. They're like, we're going to make a show and we're going to spend 6 years doing it. And we're going to have great voice acting. We're going to have great music. We're going to have a vision, a specific animation style. They poured so much into it. And even if you don't like it, which is fine, I love it. But they went for it. They put so much into it. They had so much care. And I think that the success of that show comes down to how much, what you're saying, that they really had to put their all into it. And I don't know, the other companies have to put their all into it. They just throw these enormous budgets at stuff and then they just slap some special effects on that ultimately don't even look very good, and then they call it a day, is what it feels like. I'm being a little harsh. But yeah, I agree. I think it would be interesting if you had, even if they end up on Amazon or end up on Netflix, if those companies aren't the ones responsible for all of the writing, casting, all that stuff. Leave it to the less cooks in the kitchen, I think, oftentimes the better. I want to see unadapted works given a chance. I would love to see, you mentioned Garth Nix, Sabriel, come to life on screen. The world building and imagery is so interesting. So yeah, I just thought that was interesting that more than one person mentioned that one specific author's works. I don't mind remakes. I think it's interesting to see what new perspectives each one brings to the table. Classics get adapted over and over all the time, so I don't think it's a problem for genre stories either. I think that's a nice way to look at it. I wrote my thesis on adaptations of Anne of Green Gables and how the way they put the story to screen reflects the time they were made in, especially for women's roles in society and representation. This was in 2017, so the Netflix adaptation wasn't out yet, so I compared a YouTube web series adaptation and the movies from the 80s. Having this show as well to analyze would have worked better for the feminism angle I was looking at the adaptations from, but oh well. And I just thought that was so interesting, and what a cool thesis also. That's, I think, awesome and so interesting. But I really liked this because it's kind of tying back to the idea of what is the purpose and why is it sometimes these companies think this is the right avenue for this story to be told in now. Here's what we can, with the technology we have, with the animation styles we have, with the voice actors that we have, the music. Here's why we think this particular, whether it's a show, an animated show, live action, whatever the case may be, or here's why we think that this story should be on this. And if you have a vision and a reason, I think that makes sense. Usually the reason is this is going to make us money. And I think that's what loses a lot of us. I think I'll go ahead and end there. There's so many other elements to this that I thought were really interesting, but I'll just kind of wrap it up here. I would love to know, though, if there's something else that you wanted to add to the conversation. Are you excited for some of these remakes? Are you optimistic? Are you maybe not optimistic, but hopeful? What are your thoughts on remakes as a whole? And when do you think they work? When do they not work? Or do you not like them ever? Thanks so much for watching, though. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you later. Bye.